Welcome to the History Maps podcast. Usually, when military history is discussed, you expect a certain level of precision.
Right, it almost feels like a predictable physics equation.
Exactly. You take a massive, battle-hardened army, you multiply it by superior technology, and you get a conquest.
Because if Force A is overwhelmingly larger than Force B, Force A wins. We tend to favor narratives that follow that clean, logical progression.
But then you step into the world of 13th century Southeast Asia.
Yeah, specifically the Mongol invasions of Vietnam.
And suddenly, that entire physics equation just breaks down completely. The military landscape you're looking at is murky, complex, and highly hostile to conventional warfare.
We're examining a period spanning from 1258 to 1288. This is a cornerstone of the Southeast Asian history series.
And the core issue we are unpacking in our deep dive into the source material today is how the Mongol Empire failed.
An entity that had systematically dismantled armies from the freezing plains of Russia to the deserts of Persia.
Right, and the walled cities of northern China. But they failed to subjugate the much smaller kingdoms of Avet and Champa.
They failed 3 separate times over 3 decades.
So our mission is to analyze the sources and figure out the mechanics of that failure. Because the traditional narrative of the unstoppable Mongol cavalry completely falls apart in these tropical river deltas.
We need to examine the tactics, the geographical advantages, the psychological warfare, and the sheer logistical nightmares that neutralized a global superpower.
To really grasp the mechanics here, you have to consider the broader context the sources provide.
Exactly. The Mongols were not just fighting rival armies, they were fighting the climate itself.
The geography.
And a highly unified population. I mean, this was a population absolutely willing to burn their own cities to the ground.
Just creating artificial deserts in the middle of a jungle.
Yeah,
Right.
just to deny the enemy a single foothold.
And we're also going to see a notable evolution, or maybe degradation is the better word, of the Mongol military machine itself.
Over these 3 decades, they shift from a hypermobile steppe cavalry into a slow, heavy, maritime-dependent force.
And that shift proves fatal. So let's set the board before 1258 and look at the world you'd be living in.
The Mongol war machine is in full swing under Monkey Khan. They control vast stretches of Eurasia.
But they are currently bogged down in a massive, grinding war of attrition with the Song dynasty in southern China.
Right, they are facing a severe strategic bottleneck. The Song dynasty is protected by the Yangtze River.
And the Mongols are steppe nomads. Their expertise is cavalry, not naval warfare or amphibious assaults.
Exactly. A frontal assault across the Yangtze against the heavily fortified Song navy would be incredibly costly.
Maybe even suicidal.
Probably. So the Mongol leadership, specifically Monkey Khan and his brother Kublai, determined they need to flank the Song.
They want to establish a base of operations in the southwest to strike at the Song's vulnerable underbelly.
Completely bypassing those river defenses.
But to execute that flanking maneuver, they have to move their armies across some very specific geography.
Geography occupied by the established kingdoms of Southeast Asia.
And those kingdoms are formidable in their own right.
Very much so. In the north of modern-day Vietnam, you have Vach. The Chinese records often refer to it as Enam.
This kingdom is centered around the Red River Delta, with its capital at Tung Long, which is modern-day Hanoi.
And the geography here is crucial to note. The Red River Delta is a dense, intricate network of waterways, rice paddies, and heavy vegetation.
It's wealthy, predominantly Buddhist, and features a rich agricultural base.
By the 1220s, it's ruled by the Trun dynasty, and they've spent decades highly centralizing the power of the state.
Right, curbing the power of local warlords and building a national military structure.
They also have a highly functional, stable relationship with the Song dynasty.
Vit pays tribute. They engage in robust cross-border trade. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement.
They have absolutely no incentive to see the Song destroyed.
Then to the south of Avet, you have the Kingdom of Champa.
The Chams are an Austronesian people. That means they share linguistic and cultural ties with the seafaring peoples of maritime Southeast Asia and the Pacific.
Because of that heritage, they have a heavy maritime focus. They are master shipbuilders and navigators.
Historically, Champa was a collection of smaller Hindu and Muslim coastal kingdoms.
But by the mid-13th century, mostly in response to aggressive incursions from the Khmer Empire to their west, they had united.
United under a centralized leadership based in the city of Vijaya.
So you have these two distinct kingdoms. Ayvik is a centralized agricultural powerhouse heavily fortified by river networks.
And Champa is a maritime-focused kingdom reliant on lucrative coastal trade routes and deep jungle terrain.
And into this complex geopolitical ecosystem rides Uriyangqadai.
Uryankwadai is a highly experienced veteran Mongol general. He is the son of the legendary commander Subutai,
The man who orchestrated the invasions of Eastern Europe.
the very same. In 1253, operating on the orders of Möngke Khan, Uryankwadai conquers the Dali kingdom in Yunnan.
Yunnan is a mountainous region that directly borders Ayvik to the northwest.
He spends a few years pacifying the local populations, integrating local tribal fighters into his ranks, and then he looks south.
He needs to push his army straight through Daiviet to execute that grand flanking maneuver against the Song.
Right, and Ayvit isn't even the primary target at this initial stage. The Mongols view them merely as an obstacle in the road.
They simply demand free, unimpeded passage for their army to march through to attack the Song.
They also demand assurances that Ayvit will not harass their supply lines or provide military support to their Song allies.
Uryankadai sends envoys to the Tren court at Tanlong to demand this submission.
And King Trantaitong of Ayvit takes a highly aggressive stance.
He refuses the demand, and then he imprisons the Mongol envoys.
I want to pause here because understanding this decision is vital. Why provoke the conquerors of the known world?
Well, the Trin Kings are fundamentally opposed to allowing a massive foreign army to march through their sovereign territory.
Permitting the Mongols to cross Ayvit would essentially surrender their independence. It would turn their kingdom into a Mongol staging ground.
Plus, it would mean betraying their primary trading partner and political ally, the Song dynasty.
The Tren leadership calculates that fighting the Mongols in the defensive terrain of the Red River Delta is a better gamble than peacefully surrendering their sovereignty.
But by imprisoning the envoys, they force a military response.
What the Mongols initially planned as a strategic bypass suddenly escalates into a full-blown, punitive invasion of Ayvit.
Which brings us to the first invasion in the winter of 1258.
Uryankwadai and his son Aju cross the border into Ayvit.
The historical sources estimate their forces at anywhere from 10,000 to 30,000 men.
And this army is a hybrid. It's not just the classic Mongol steppe cavalry.
Right, it includes a large contingent of locally raised Yi soldiers from the newly conquered mountainous terrain of Yunnan.
The first major engagement happens at the Battle of Bin Let Nghien.
The Vietnamese forces march out to meet the invaders, and they deploy a weapons system. The Mongols are not entirely accustomed to fighting in open combat.
War elephants.
King Kren Taitong himself is on the battlefield, directing his troops from atop one of these massive animals.
You really have to put yourself in the saddle of a Mongol cavalryman for a second here.
Right, you're used to fighting other mounted archers or infantry formations.
Suddenly, the tree line breaks, and you are facing a literal wall of armored elephants charging directly at your lines.
The psychological impact of that must be immense, but Arju, the Mongol commander, reads the battlefield and immediately issues a highly specific counter-order to his archers.
He realizes that conventional volleys into the thick hides or armor of the elephants will be entirely useless.
So he orders his archers to aim exclusively at the most vulnerable points.
The elephants' feet and their eyes.
It's a brutal, calculated tactical pivot.
And it is highly effective. The arrows strike the sensitive areas.
The elephants are blinded, in agonizing pain, and completely panicked.
They become uncontrollable. They turn around to flee the source of the pain and end up stampeding right back through the densely packed Vietnamese infantry lines.
The Vietnamese army's formation is instantly shattered, thrown into absolute chaos, and routed.
But the sources make a crucial distinction here. It's a defeat, but it's not a total slaughter.
The Vietnamese leadership manages to conduct a highly disciplined, orderly retreat by ship down the riverways.
That retreat preserves the core of the state. As long as the king, the court, and the military command structure survive, the kingdom can continue to resist.
However, the battlefield victory allows the Mongols to push forward rapidly. They capture the capital city, Songlong.
They march into the city and find their imprisoned envoys. One of them has died in captivity.
In retaliation for this diplomatic insult, the Mongols execute a massacre of the remaining inhabitants.
They very quickly realize that capturing the city does not mean they've captured the kingdom's resources.
The victory is structurally hollow. When Uryankwadai occupies Tonglong, he finds the city's warehouses empty.
The Tren King, the government officials, and the vast majority of the population had evacuated well in advance.
They utilized the river network to transport all the grain, food stores, and portable wealth right out of the city.
Think about the logistics of feeding 30,000 men and perhaps an equal number of horses.
The Mongol military model relies heavily on extraction. They ride into a fertile area, defeat the local army, and feed themselves using the conquered population's granaries.
If you remove the food, the extractive model collapses entirely.
And the environment immediately begins to degrade the Mongol combat effectiveness.
They are subtly dealing with temperatures and humidity levels they have never experienced. The heat is stifling.
Tropical diseases, primarily malaria and dysentery, begin sweeping through the camps.
The steppe ponies, bred for the cold, arid climates of Central Asia, are growing weak on a diet they aren't accustomed to.
And in a climate that prevents them from regulating their body heat.
To compound these miseries, Vietnamese local militias emerge from the surrounding countryside to launch constant harassing night ambushes.
Uriyankadi is also bound by Mongol Khan's strict timetable.
Right, the entire purpose of this expedition was to flank the Song dynasty.
He cannot afford to sit in an empty, smoldering city watching his men die of dysentery, while the main campaign in China waits for him.
Exactly 9 days after occupying the capital, Uriyankadi issues the order to withdraw.
9 days. The vanguard of the most feared military machine on Earth captures a capital city, and they are forced to abandon it just over a week later.
Their march north back toward the Song border is miserable. They are continually harassed by Vietnamese guerrilla forces.
The local populations actually begin referring to them mockingly as Buddhist enemies.
It's a sarcastic moniker earned because the Mongols are in such a desperate hurry to escape the territory that they don't even stop to loot villages or kill civilians along the retreat route.
They just focus on moving as fast as possible.
So looking at the aftermath of 1258, how do we evaluate the outcome? Who won?
It seems like an outcome defined by pragmatic compromise. Shortly after the Mongols withdraw, King Tran Taitong initiates a diplomatic channel.
He agrees to send envoys and establish a nominal tributary relationship with the Mongol court.
From the Mongol perspective, they can record this as a strategic success. They secured a tributary state and they forced a path through the territory to attack the Song.
But the Vietnamese perspective is entirely different. They preserved their functional independence.
They agreed to send tribute, which is largely symbolic, but they also maintained their robust diplomatic and trade ties with the Song dynasty.
They successfully played both sides of the geopolitical divide to ensure their survival.
If we pull back and analyze the mechanics of this first invasion, it reveals a profound vulnerability in the Mongol war machine.
Their entire tactical doctrine relies on rapid mobility, superior archery, and decisive field battles that quickly break an enemy's will.
When they face a highly organized state that refuses pitched battles, utilizes a disciplined, scorched earth policy, and weaponizes the harsh environment, the Mongol momentum stalls completely.
They simply lack the logistical infrastructure to sustain a prolonged occupation in a hostile, resource-depleted, disease-ridden tropical delta.
They require the land to feed them. You create an artificial desert, and they starve.
This uneasy, delicate balance of power holds for roughly 2 decades.
The Vietnamese and the Chams send their periodic tribute, and the Mongols focus their immense resources on the grinding conquest of the Song dynasty.
But the geopolitical landscape undergoes a tectonic shift in 1279.
The Song dynasty finally collapses under the weight of the Mongol offensives.
The crucial buffer state that separated Southeast Asia from the Mongol heartland is completely gone.
Kublai Khan has now established the Yuan dynasty in China, and his massive empire shares a direct, tense border with Ai-Vint.
And Kublai Khan's rule is different. He has outlived many of the pragmatic advisors of his earlier years.
He has also suffered the massive humiliation of the failed naval invasions of Japan.
He is increasingly impatient, deeply concerned with imperial prestige, and he expects absolute, unquestioning submission.
He begins issuing decrees demanding that the kings of Ai-Viet and Champa travel to his court in person to kneel and confirm their allegiance.
He demands more than just personal submission too. He demands golden statues of the kings, to be sent as tribute.
He demands they surrender their best physicians, their most skilled artisans, and their most beautiful women.
It's a calculated, extreme escalation of tributary demands designed to humiliate the local rulers and assert absolute Yuan dominance.
The kings of Iviat and Champa flatly refuse to submit in person.
The internal political climate in both of these kingdoms has become fiercely anti-Yuan.
A major factor driving this sentiment is the massive influx of refugees.
When the Song dynasty fell, thousands of Chinese officials, military officers, soldiers, and civilians fled south into Iviat and Champa.
These refugees carry profound grievances against the Mongols.
And they actively integrate into the local societies, inciting resistance and sharing vital intelligence about Yuan military tactics.
The diplomatic situation deteriorates rapidly. The flashpoint occurs in 1282 in the Kingdom of Champa.
The Chams intercept and imprison a group of Yuan envoys who were attempting to travel through their territory on a diplomatic mission to polities further south.
Kublai Khan seizes on this imprisonment as the perfect pretext for war.
He decides to bypass Wei Viet for the moment and launch a direct naval strike against Champa.
Strategically, attacking Champa first aligns with Kublai's broader imperial ambitions.
Controlling Champa means establishing direct control over the incredibly lucrative maritime trade routes that connect the South China Sea to the Indian Ocean.
It gives the Yuan dynasty a stranglehold on international commerce.
Plus, if Kublai successfully occupies Champa, he places Avid in a geographical vice grip.
They would be surrounded by the massive Yuan Empire to the north and a heavily militarized Yuan garrison to the south.
Kublai assigns a veteran commander named Sogetu to lead the expedition.
But the force allocation is notably small for a Mongol campaign.
Kublai relies on intelligence from his officials who assure him that Champa is politically fragmented, militarily weak, and will capitulate quickly.
Based on this flawed intelligence, Sogetu departs in late 1282 with a force of only 5,000 men.
Transported on 100 ships.
100 ships. The sources explicitly note that this fleet size is severely constrained because the Yuan dynasty had lost an astronomical number of vessels in the catastrophic typhoons that destroyed their fleets during the invasions of Japan.
They simply do not have the naval transport capacity to send a larger army.
Sogetu's fleet arrives off the coast near the Cham capital of Vijaya in February 1283.
They encounter initial resistance on the beaches. The Chams have constructed extensive wooden palisades along the shoreline.
There is a brief, intense engagement. The Mongol forces breach the wooden defenses, push inland, and successfully capture the capital city.
But the Chams execute the exact same playbook Ivid used decades earlier.
The Cham leadership, King Indravarman V and his son, Prince Hurajit, refuse to surrender.
They evacuate Vijaya completely. They burn their own warehouses to ash, retreat deep into the dense, mountainous jungle interior, and absolutely refuse to offer Sogetu the decisive pitched battle he desperately needs.
Sogetu attempts to force the issue. In March, he organizes a strong detachment and sends them marching into the mountains to hunt down the king's encampment.
The detachment marches into a nightmare. They are ambushed in the suffocating heat of the dense jungle by Cham guerrilla fighters.
The Chams utilize their deep knowledge of the terrain, striking from the heavy foliage and retreating before the Mongols can form a coherent defense.
The Yuan detachment is severely mauled and driven back to the coast with heavy casualties.
Prince Hurajit initiates a relentless, exhausting guerrilla war that slowly bleeds the Mongol invaders.
This leads to a scenario that fundamentally challenges our perception of the Mongol military.
Sogetu realizes he cannot hold the interior. He's forced to retreat back to the coastal beaches.
He orders his men to construct a fortified wooden stockade to protect themselves from continuous Cham raids.
And because the Chams burned the food stores, and because his own maritime supply lines from China are essentially non-existent, Sogetu has to feed his army.
He orders his hardened warriors to put down their weapons, clear the coastal land, and plant rice.
The chronicles record that they successfully harvest 150,000 pickles of rice that summer.
To translate that into modern terms, a pickle is roughly 130 pounds. We're talking about nearly 20 million pounds or 10,000 tons of rice.
The sheer agricultural labor required to clear land, plant, tend, and harvest, that volume of food using a trapped military force, is staggering.
Consider the absurdity of this image. The Mongol military identity is built on supreme mobility.
They ride hundreds of miles a day, sleeping in the saddle, sustaining themselves on dried meat and mare's milk.
How does a force with that legacy end up acting as stationary, besieged farmers on a tropical beach in Vietnam?
It starkly illustrates the severe logistical inflexibility of their model when removed from the steppes.
As we established, the Mongol way of war was extractive. They struck hard, moved fast, and supplied themselves from the conquered.
When a population vanishes into the mountains and destroys the resources, extraction is impossible. You cannot pillage grain from a burned warehouse.
And because they arrived by ship, they have no horses to forage with and no open plains to cross.
They are pinned against the ocean by an enemy that entirely controls the jungle.
The greatest cavalry force in the history of the world is reduced to subsistence farming just to stave off mass starvation.
Sojatu recognizes his position is untenable. He sends urgent messages back to Kublai Khan, begging for massive reinforcements to break the stalemate.
Kublai Khan's response to Sogitu's plea sets the stage for the second, immensely destructive conflict.
Kublai realizes he cannot easily reinforce Sogatu by sea.
So he makes the fateful decision to send a colossal land army marching straight down from the north, right through the heart of Avit, to rescue his trapped general.
And conquer both kingdoms simultaneously.
This brings us to the massive mobilization of 1284. Kublai places his own son, Prince Togun, in command of this colossal force.
The historical sources present wildly varying numbers regarding the size of this army, which is a common issue when dealing with medieval chronicles.
Some estimates suggest 80,000 combatants. Others claim the total force, including supply trains and auxiliaries, reached 500,000 men.
Regardless of the exact figure, it represents one of the largest, most heavily equipped armies the Yuan dynasty has ever assembled for a southern campaign.
This is a fundamentally different army than the one Uriankai led 30 years prior.
It includes elite Mongol heavy cavalry, tens of thousands of heavily armored Chinese infantry conscripts, and highly sophisticated siege engineering units.
They arrive at the northern border and demand passage through Avik.
The Vietnamese leadership understands precisely what this means. This is an army of conquest.
King Tron Ton Tong, who has formally abdicated the throne to his son but retains ultimate executive authority as Emperor Emeritus, convenes a massive council.
He summons the elders, the military commanders, and the nobility from across the entire kingdom.
According to the historical chronicles, he presents the situation. The greatest army on earth is on their border. He asks the assembly whether they should submit or fight.
The chronicles record that the entire assembly shouts in unison, "Fight."
This represents a moment of total, profound national mobilization. It is a society committing entirely to a war of survival.
And this crisis elevates one of the most notable figures in Vietnamese history, Prince Truong Quoc Ton, who is universally known as Prince Hung Ngo.
Prince Hung Ngo is appointed as the supreme commander of the military forces. He's a highly effective leader and a brilliant strategic mind.
He immediately takes control of the ideological narrative of war. He issues a famous, deeply moving proclamation to the troops.
He acknowledges the terrifying strength of the Mongols, but he emphasizes that the invaders do not understand the mountains, they do not understand the rivers, and they underestimate the resolve of the people.
He unifies the disparate factions of the population around a single, uncompromising goal: defending every inch of their homeland, regardless of the cost.
The military challenge he faces is monumental. In January 1285, the Mongols unleash a devastating pincer movement designed to crush the Vietnamese forces.
Prince Takan drives his massive overland army south from Yunnan, smashing into the northern defenses.
Simultaneously, Sogitu, having finally received some naval reinforcements, breaks out of his coastal enclave in Champa and begins marching rapidly north.
The strategic objective is to trap Prince Hung Ngo's armies between these two immense crushing forces.
The initial phase of the Mongol advance is a display of overwhelming conventional power.
The Vietnamese attempt to establish defensive lines at key river crossings and narrow mountain passes.
But the sheer weight of the Yuan numbers, combined with their heavy artillery and elite cavalry shock tactics, shatters the defensive formations.
At major engagements like the Battle of Noi Bang, the Vietnamese lines are comprehensively crushed. The Mongols push relentlessly forward.
By February, they reach the north bank of the Co River, defeat the final ring of Vietnamese defenders, and capture the capital city of Thang Long once again.
Thang Long is captured and burned. The Mongol war machine looks completely unstoppable.
Tolkien establishes his headquarters in the ruins of the captured royal palace. He sends out envoys demanding the immediate surrender of the Trung kings.
But Prince Hung had anticipated this exact scenario. He knows that trading casualties with a numerically superior force in pitched battles is suicide.
Hung completely shifts the tactical paradigm. He refuses to defend fixed positions.
He orders a comprehensive, highly organized tactical retreat of his military forces into the deep countryside and the coastal swamps.
And he initiates a scorched earth policy that is absolute in its severity.
He famously tells his officers, "Let the jungle feed us and starve them."
The Vietnamese population burns their own rice fields just before harvest. They destroy stockpiled crops. They systematically poison the village wells.
They take their livestock, their wealth, and their families, and they vanish into the terrain. They leave nothing behind but ash and poisoned water.
This physical denial of resources is paired with an intense campaign of psychological warfare.
Vietnamese soldiers begin tattooing the words "Sat That" on their arms. This translates to "death to the Mongols."
It is a permanent physical declaration of total defiance.
The Mongols actually capture some of these soldiers, and when they strip them and see the tattoos, they execute them immediately.
The tattoos signal that there is no negotiation, only a fight to the death.
Hung Ah also authorizes a fascinating psychological tactic involving the Song dynasty refugees who have joined his army.
He orders these former Song soldiers to march into battle wearing the distinct armor and uniforms of the fallen Song dynasty.
Let's explain the psychological impact of that decision. Why does wearing old armor matter to the Mongol forces?
Because a massive percentage of Takan's infantry consists of Chinese troops who were only recently conquered and conscripted into the Yuan military.
Many of them fought for the Song just a few years prior.
Seeing the uniforms of the fallen dynasty emerging from the dense jungles of a foreign land to ambush them is deeply unsettling.
It creates confusion, superstitious dread, and damages the morale of the Yuan conscripts. It makes the invaders feel as though they are fighting ghosts.
So Tokan's army is occupying an empty, burned-out capital city. They are cut off from their supply lines.
And then the environment turns against them with terrifying speed.
The climate becomes Hung Gao's most lethal weapon. The campaign stretches into the summer months.
We are talking about temperatures routinely exceeding 100 degrees Fahrenheit, paired with unbearable, suffocating tropical humidity.
The heat makes wearing the heavy leather and iron armor of the Mongol cavalry physically impossible. Soldiers are suffering from heat stroke.
The humidity is so extreme that the sources mention it actively degraded their weaponry.
The moisture warped the wood of their composite bows and caused their bowstrings to rot and snap. Their primary weapon system is failing them.
Furthermore, waterborne and mosquito-borne diseases tear through the crowded, unsanitary Yuan encampments.
Malaria, severe tropical fevers, and rampant dysentery incapacitate thousands of soldiers.
The steppe horses are dying in massive numbers from the heat and lack of proper forage.
The Yuan supply lines stretching back to China are dangerously thin, constantly harassed by guerrillas, and the scorched earth tactics mean foraging locally yields absolutely nothing.
They are trapped in a hostile ecosystem that is actively disassembling their army.
And once the Mongols are weakened, sick, and starving, Prince Hung Ao launches his counteroffensive.
By May 1285, the Yuan supply network collapses completely. Tokon's army is desperate.
He is forced to order Sogetu, who is still marching north, to attack a heavily fortified Vietnamese base at Nam for the sole purpose of seizing food stores.
But the Vietnamese counterattack is incredibly fierce and entirely asymmetric.
They don't line up in fields. They utilize their knowledge of the terrain to create killing zones.
They fell massive trees to build barricades across narrow jungle paths, forcing the Mongol cavalry into tight, enclosed spaces where they cannot maneuver or charge.
They dig deep pits, fill them with sharpened, poisoned bamboo stakes, camouflage them with leaves, and bait the Mongol forces into charging over them.
The naval warfare during this phase is particularly decisive.
The Vietnamese river fleets are composed of small, light, highly maneuverable vessels that draw very little water.
In late May, at the Battle of Ham Tu, a partisan force composed largely of former Song troops and native militia utilizes these small ships to completely devastate a contingent of heavy Yuan troop transports.
The Vietnamese vessels dart rapidly between the larger, clumsy Mongol ships on the rivers, hurling incendiary firepots and shooting flaming arrows, turning the Yuan fleet into floating infernos.
The Mongol position collapses with stunning speed. Tagan, surrounded by dying men and horses, realizes his entire colossal army is facing total annihilation.
He officially cites the extreme heat and rampant disease as his reasons, and he orders a general, immediate retreat back toward the Chinese border.
But this is not an orderly withdrawal. It is a chaotic, desperate flight.
And in the chaos of that flight, Tagan makes a fatal error. He leaves Sogetu behind.
It's a massive failure of command and communication.
Tagan retreats so hastily that he fails to adequately inform Sugepu, who is fighting a separate engagement further south.
Surgat is completely isolated. When he finally realizes the main army has abandoned him, he attempts a desperate fighting retreat northward.
But his forces are exhausted and completely surrounded by the resurgent Vietnamese army.
In June 1285, at the Battle of Truong Duong, the joint Vietnamese forces close the trap.
They wipe out Sugetu's army, and the veteran Mongol commander Sugetu is killed in the fighting.
Meanwhile, Token's retreat overland is a waking nightmare. The Vietnamese forces harry his columns every single step of the way.
They destroy the bridges ahead of him and ambush his flanks.
And the chronicles record a detail about this retreat that perfectly encapsulates the total humiliation of the mighty Mongol Empire.
Kogon, a prince of the blood, the great-grandson of Genghis Khan, is so utterly terrified of the poisoned arrows raining down constantly from the jungle canopy that his engineers have to construct a giant, thick copper tube.
Tokhon hides inside this metal cylinder while his exhausted soldiers carry him physically across the border into China.
It is a profound, indelible humiliation for the Yuan dynasty. The second invasion ends in an absolute fiasco.
The surviving Yuan generals, including a commander named Omar, are forced to abandon their troops and barely escape to the sea in a small boat.
The surviving remnants of the Grand Mongol army limp back into Chinese territory, having lost tens of thousands of men, their horses, and their pride.
Prince Sung-ah systematically dismantled every single advantage the Mongols possessed. He refused to fight on their terms.
He stretched their supply lines to the breaking point, he starved them, he let the heat and diseases break their physical strength, and only then did he attack their isolated units.
It remains a historical masterclass in reading the terrain and weaponizing the limitations of an enemy's logistical structure.
Tokhon survives his copper tube journey and makes it back to the Yuan capital.
I cannot imagine Kublai Khan was understanding about the situation.
Kublai Khan is incandescent with rage. The loss of face is intolerable.
He is so furious at the catastrophic failure and the cowardly nature of the retreat that he officially banishes his son Tokhon from the capital city, refusing to ever see him again.
But Kublai's response to defeat is never introspection. It is escalation. He immediately orders the military high command to begin planning a third, even larger invasion.
This brings us to 1287, and Kublai is deeply obsessed with achieving this victory.
He actually cancels a meticulously planned third naval invasion of Japan just so he can redirect the entire logistical and military might of the empire toward crushing Viet.
Kublai recognizes that the logistical failures, specifically the starvation caused by the scorched earth policy, doomed the second campaign.
So for this third attempt, the strategy shifts dramatically. He gathers an army of roughly 170,000 troops.
But the critical difference is the logistics. He orders the construction of a massive transport fleet consisting of 500 large ships.
The entire strategic plan is designed around sea-based supply lines. The combat army will march overland, but they will be constantly provisioned by this massive fleet moving down the coast and into the river deltas,
completely bypassing the need to forage in the hostile Vietnamese interior.
They also introduce a political warfare element to this campaign. They bring along a defected Vietnamese royal, Prince Truong Tuc.
The plan is to install him on the throne in Thang Long as a compliant puppet king once they conquer the territory,
giving their occupation a veneer of local legitimacy.
In October 1287, the third massive invasion begins. Tokhon is given one last, desperate chance to redeem his reputation, commanding the mainland army striking from the north.
The naval combat fleet, composed of heavy warships, is commanded by General Omar, who survived the previous disaster and is seeking revenge.
The initial assault is executed with overwhelming force. They shatter the border defenses, they march rapidly south, and by early 1288, they capture the capital city of Thang Long for the third time in 30 years.
But the Vietnamese simply play the exact same card. The capital is completely abandoned.
There are no people, no grain stores, no wealth, just empty buildings.
And here is where the massive Yuan war machine commits a fatal logistical error. Tokhon's land army and Omar's naval combat fleet advance aggressively, eager to secure early victories and capture territory.
But in their haste, they completely outpace their logistics.
They leave the heavy, slow-moving supply transport fleet, commanded by an officer named Zhang Wenhu, and carrying the millions of pounds of grain required to keep the army alive, lagging several days behind the combat vanguard.
They outrun their own supply lines. They separate the teeth of the army from its stomach.
Precisely. And the Vietnamese Navy, commanded by a brilliant tactician named Prince Trung Khan spots this critical vulnerability.
Trenkandu realizes that engaging Omar's heavily armed elite combat warships is unnecessary.
Instead, he bypasses the combat fleet entirely and maneuvers his forces to intercept the slow, heavily laden, poorly defended supply fleet near the coastal islands.
The Vietnamese absolutely annihilate the supply fleet.
They board the ships, sink the transports, and dump the grain into the ocean.
The food, the weapons, the vital provisions, everything the Mongol army requires to sustain an extended campaign sinks to the bottom of the sea.
Tugon and Omar consolidate their forces at a fortified river base called Van Kiep, confidently waiting for their massive supply fleet to arrive and feed their 170,000 men.
Days pass. When intelligence finally reaches them that the entire fleet rests at the bottom of the ocean, the situation immediately turns desperate.
By March 1288, staring at empty granaries and an army once again on the verge of starvation, Togon realizes the campaign is functionally over. He orders another general retreat.
I want to pause here and ask a broader strategic question. It's something we touched on earlier, but it becomes glaringly obvious here.
The Mongol Empire was forged by self-sufficient units, warriors who could ride continuously for days, sleep in the freezing mud, drink the blood from their horses' veins if water was scarce, and carry their own dried meat rations.
How did that hypermobile, fiercely independent force devolve into an army that was so heavily reliant on slow-moving maritime supply chains that the loss of a single grain fleet forced a humiliating retreat of 170,000 men without a major pitched battle?
It is the central paradox of this era, and it speaks directly to how empires dilute their core strengths as they expand.
By the 1280s, the Yuan military is no longer primarily a steppe cavalry force. It has transformed into a conventional, sedentary imperial army.
The vast majority of the soldiers are conscripted Chinese infantrymen and southern sailors.
They have adopted the military architecture of the empires they conquered.
Yes, they are dragging incredibly heavy siege equipment to knock down city walls. They require thousands of tons of rice every week to feed the massive infantry formations.
And crucially, they're operating in an environment where horses cannot graze. You simply cannot pasture tens of thousands of steppe ponies in a dense tropical jungle or a flooded rice paddy.
Because they lost their mobility and their ability to forage, they were forced to adapt to maritime supply chains.
But when you adopt conventional supply lines, you adopt the vulnerabilities of those lines. When a highly mobile enemy severs the umbilical cord of a conventional army, the army dies.
And the Vietnamese knew exactly how to find and cut that cord. So, facing starvation, Trohan orders the retreat.
The land army attempts to march north back to China. It is the same horror story as 1285.
The Vietnamese destroy the bridges, launch constant ambushes, and dig spike-filled pits.
Turan is actually struck by a poisoned arrow during this chaotic retreat and barely manages to survive his agonizing journey back across the border.
While the land retreat is a disaster, the real catastrophe, the event that permanently etches this campaign into military history, unfolds on the water.
General Omar's naval combat fleet cannot march overland. They must navigate their heavy warships down the complex river systems to escape into the open sea.
And Prince Hungao has prepared an elaborate, incredibly lethal trap for them at the mouth of the Baden River.
The Battle of Baden, which takes place in April 1288, is widely considered a highly effective piece of asymmetrical warfare, engineering, and environmental timing.
Omar is sailing down this massive tidal river. He has the superior navy in terms of ship size, armor, and manpower.
How does Hungao level the playing field here? The engineering is meticulous.
Prince Hungao understood the complex tidal patterns of the Batgang River perfectly. He knew exactly when the water rose and fell.
Weeks in advance, he ordered thousands of his soldiers to cut down massive hardwood trees from the jungle.
They stripped the trunks, sharpened the ends, and capped them with heavy iron points.
Working at low tide, they drove thousands of these massive stakes deep into the mud of the riverbed at a very specific, narrow choke point.
The crucial element of this trap is the water level. These iron-capped stakes are completely submerged and invisible when the tide comes in.
But they are deadly obstacles when the tide recedes.
On the morning of April 9th, Omar's massive Yuan fleet is sailing aggressively down the river, pushing toward the sea. The tide is high. The water is deep.
To spring the trap, Hungao sends a small squadron of light, highly maneuverable Vietnamese boats out to engage the vanguard of the Yuan fleet.
They're essentially acting as bait.
Exactly. The Vietnamese boats engage briefly, firing a few arrows, and then immediately feign panic.
They turn around and initiate a rapid retreat back up the river, moving directly over the submerged stakes.
Omar sees the retreating ships. He thinks he has the enemy routed. He orders his massive deep-draft warships to pursue them at full speed.
The Yuan fleet surges forward, crossing directly into the kill zone over the hidden stakes.
Hung F's timing, based entirely on the lunar cycle that dictates the tides, is absolutely flawless. As the heavy Yuan ships push deep into the trap, the tide begins its rapid recession.
The water level drops rapidly, pulling the ships downward.
The massive wooden hulls of the heavy Mongol warships come crashing down onto the iron-capped stakes with immense force.
The hardwood splinters, the hulls are violently ripped open, and the massive vessels are instantly immobilized, impaled in the shallow, receding, muddy water.
They are completely stuck.
It is a remarkable tactical move. The Vietnamese essentially weaponized the moon.
They used the lunar cycle and the gravity that controls the tides to destroy the navy of the Mongol Empire.
It is the ultimate expression of turning the environment against the invader. Once the Yuan ships are impaled and helpless, the main Vietnamese fleet, which had been hiding in the tributary creeks, launches a massive assault.
They unleash a relentless barrage of fire arrows and hurl incendiary fire pots directly onto the wooden decks of the trap ships. The sails and rigging quickly catch fire.
And because the smaller Vietnamese boats have very shallow drafts, they are completely unaffected by the stakes. They just swarm around the massive burning behemoths.
Vietnamese warriors utilize grappling hooks to board the burning Yuan ships.
The battle devolves into savage, desperate, hand-to-hand combat on decks that are engulfed in thick smoke and intense flame.
The heavily armored Mongol and Chinese soldiers are completely trapped. If they stay on the ships, they burn or are cut down. If they jump in their heavy armor into the river, they drown in the thick mud.
The slaughter on the river is absolute. General Omar, the commander of the fleet, is taken alive as a prisoner of war.
Another senior Yuan commander, Fen Yi, is killed during the boarding actions. The historical chronicles state that roughly 400 Yuan ships are either destroyed or captured that day.
The entire naval combat force is effectively annihilated in a single afternoon.
When you combine this total naval wipeout with the destruction of Tokon's land army during its retreat, the third invasion concludes in a catastrophe that rivals the devastation of the Mongol fleets off the rocky coast of Japan.
The military phase of this 30-year conflict ends in total disaster for the Yuan dynasty. But the geopolitical maneuvering does not stop with the sinking of the ships.
Kublai Khan's reaction is entirely predictable. He is enraged beyond reason.
Even after this unprecedented disaster, he immediately orders his ministers to begin stockpiling resources for a fourth invasion.
However, reality finally intervenes. Kublai is aging rapidly, his empire is facing severe internal unrest and rebellions, and his death in 1294 finally puts a definitive end to the threat of a fourth invasion.
The Vietnamese won distinct, logic-defying military victories. But the Tron dynasty leadership recognizes that their kingdom cannot sustain a state of perpetual war against an empire that controls the resources of China.
King Tran Tong surveys his kingdom in the aftermath of 1288. The victory is complete, but the cost is staggering.
The capital, Tan Long, has been repeatedly razed to the ground. The vital agricultural infrastructure has been severely damaged by the scorched earth policies.
Famine and starvation are ravaging the civilian population. Tens of thousands of Vietnamese soldiers and civilians are dead, and sacred Buddhist monasteries have been desecrated and burned.
They secured their independence, but the kingdom is teetering on the edge of total collapse.
Instead of gloating or taunting the defeated Mongol court, the Vietnamese execute a masterstroke of pragmatic diplomacy. They offer an olive branch.
They agreed to formally resume a nominal tributary relationship with the Yuan dynasty.
And they send a highly symbolic gift. Instead of the king humiliating himself by traveling to the Yuan court to submit in person, they cast a solid golden statue of the king
and send it to China as a formal apology for their sins against the empire.
It is a highly pragmatic piece of diplomatic face-saving.
This gesture allows the Yuan dynasty to officially record a political victory in their imperial annals. They can claim Iviet is a pacified vassal state.
While in reality, Iviet retains its total functional independence and self-governance without the threat of another immediate invasion.
The irony of that conclusion is notable. The Mongol Empire, a military juggernaut that literally reshaped the geopolitical borders of the globe from Eastern Europe to the Pacific Ocean, essentially had to settle for a golden statue.
And a piece of paper saying, "We submit," just to secure a pretext to stop losing entire armies in the jungles of Southeast Asia.
It was a necessary compromise for both exhausted empires. Before we conclude, there is one other legacy of this prolonged conflict that must be highlighted in the sources: the rapid transmission and evolution of military technology, specifically gunpowder.
You are referring to the technology brought over by the refugees.
Yes, when those Song dynasty soldiers fled from southern China into Ivan after 1279, they did not just bring their armor and their hatred of the Mongols.
They brought early, highly guarded gunpowder weapons, specifically early incendiary fire arrows and rudimentary fire lances.
And the Vietnamese military integrated this technology.
They integrated it, and more importantly, they refined it continuously over the following decades. They studied the chemical compositions and improved the barrel designs.
By the time the Chinese Ming dynasty attempts to invade Vietnam a century later, they discover that the Vietnamese are highly skilled in manufacturing advanced fire lances that project intense flames and shoot lethal lead bullets.
The pressure of the Mongol invasions inadvertently accelerated the technological evolution of firearms in Southeast Asia, permanently altering the region's warfare.
Let's bring all of this together. We started this deep dive by comparing military conquest to a predictable physics equation. Mass times acceleration equals victory.
But the kingdoms of Aiviet and Champa proved that the equation is fundamentally flawed.
They proved that sheer military mass and technological superiority have a hard, unforgiving limit.
When an imperial power attempts to project its massive force into an environment it fundamentally refuses to understand, it invites catastrophe.
The Mongols arrogantly tried to force a complex, tropical, riverine, heavily forested landscape to conform to the tactical doctrines of the open arid steppe.
And that landscape, weaponized and guided by strategic minds like Prince Hungao, simply swallowed the greatest army on Earth whole.
It leaves you with a thought to ponder long after this deep dive ends. When you look back through the broad sweep of history, how many other seemingly invincible empires have collapsed and burned, not because they lacked the military power or the wealth, but simply because they arrogantly tried to project that power into environments they fundamentally refused to respect or understand?
It is a dynamic we see repeated across centuries. The Dragon of the South survived the Mongol storm because it knew its own rivers, its own mountains, and the strength of its own tides far better than the conquerors of the world ever did.
Thank you for listening. History Maps. Learn history visually.